Hi, this is NextGen Picks. There's a moment that keeps surfacing in the long-term owner threads around month 3. New buyer, brand new 85 in screen, Sunday afternoon, curtains open, and the picture looks gray, washed out, lifeless. The receipt says $11.98, sometimes $8.99 if it caught a Costco week. The regret hits before they can even name it. Honestly, that's the exact moment I made this video for. That's the trap. 85 in at a price that feels like a steal, and 9 out of 10 times isn't. So the panel runs at 60 Hz. So the local dimming is edge lit, which at this size means visible halos around white subtitles. And there's no Dolby Vision on the Samsung version. But nobody at the store mentioned any of that because nobody at the store knew. So before you spend $2,500 on the wrong one, or worse, $8.99 on the wrong one, hit subscribe. NextGen Picks. This channel rips apart marketing copy, lines up the independent measurements, and finds what the brands tuck into the fine print. Here's what's actually happening with 85-inch TVs in 2026, and the showroom is built to push you towards exactly the wrong call. Look, the 85-inch category in 2026 is doing something the 65-inch category stopped doing about 4 years ago. It's confusing buyers on purpose. And to be fair, the brands aren't lying. They just stopped explaining. Here's the setup. Walk into any US retailer right now, and you'll see 85 in sets stacked from $8.99 all the way to $5,300. Same diagonal, same 4K logo, same shelf. The price gap is almost 6x, and nobody on the floor will tell you why because the answer takes more than 30 seconds. The answer is local dimming zones, sustained full-screen brightness, and native panel hertz. 3 numbers that brands have specifically chosen not to put on the box. The receipts are there if you look, they're just not on the box. So buyers do what humans always do when the spec sheets of fog. They anchor on diagonal inches and they anchor on price per inch. That's the tell. Every category where buyers anchor on size per dollar is a category being quietly cheapened from the inside. Now here's where it gets weird. The cheapening at this size isn't subtle. Samsung's 85 and Q6F actively sold for under $1,000 at multiple US retailers as of the Super Bowl window, ships at native 60 Hz, 60 on an 85 in screen for a buyer who probably bought the thing to watch football. I mean, think about that for a second. The single most cited reason people buy oversized TVs is live sports. And the cheapest 85 in the lineup is the one engineered to look worst on the exact content the buyer cares about most. The part nobody talks about is the 60 Hz panel didn't got cheaper because the manufacturer is being generous. It got cheaper because everything else was stripped. Edge-lit backlight instead of mini LED. 32-ish dimming zones across more than 11 square FT of glass, a budget SoC that murders 1080p cable upscaling, and no Dolby Vision support. Because Samsung at any tier still refuses to license it. The $8.99 price is the cost of the stripping, not the discount, right? So, who is this video for? It's for the buyer with somewhere between $1,100 and $2,500 to spend, probably this weekend, who walks in thinking the question is which brand and walks out realizing the question was actually which technology. That buyer is the one I'm talking to. If you're in the 4,000 plus OID tier, different video. If you're in the under 1,000 tier, my honest read is you should be looking at 75 in instead, and I'll come back to why later. Okay? So the first product worth pulling apart is the Hisense 85 U8QG, because this is the tell for everything happening in the category right now. List price floats around $2,000 to $2,200 at the moment, and on sale it slips closer to $19,000. And the independent measurements on this panel, the lab numbers from Tom's Guide on the 65-inch sibling, pulled HDR highlights in the high 3000 nit range. Now, those numbers shrink at 85 in because thermal headroom doesn't scale linearly, but the larger panels gain backzone count, so the contrast precision actually holds up. That's a real engineering trade-off happening on the same SKU across sizes, and he doesn't talk about it because it's confusing. Here's what's actually happening on the UHQG. The panel is a VA-style mini LED with a zone count up around the 1500 plus range at 85 in. The audio is a 4.1.2 system rated north of 70 watts, which is the part that genuinely surprised me when I dug into the long-term owner threats. Most 85-in buyers add a soundbar within the first 30 days, and UHQG owners are the rare exception who don't. The HDMI 2.1 ports run at full 48 GB on at least 2 inputs. Game mode latency lands in the single-digit millisecond range at 4K 120 according to the standard reviewer benchmark suites, and the Google TV implementation is one of the cleaner ones in the category, though Hisense's version has more pre-installed craft than the Sony version of the same OS. But, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, the UHQG has two things buyers consistently get burned on. The anti-glare coating is mediocre. Reviewers from multiple publications keep flagging the same issue. Late night viewing with one lamp on and you can see the lamp's reflection in the panel. Not the worst in the category, but not what you'd expect from a flagship. And the off-axis viewing is typical VA, which means the guy on the far end of the sectional is watching a different, lower contrast image than the guy in the middle. That's a permanent characteristic of the panel chemistry. No firmware update fixes it. The funny part is, and I don't say this lightly, the UHQG is still the smartest $2,100 buy in the category right now. Not because it's flawless, it isn't, but because of where the value curve bends. You're getting flagship class brightness, flagship class zone count, flagship class audio, and flagship class gaming features for a price that Sony, Samsung, and LG won't match on equivalent specs. The brand pays the price, the buyer doesn't. This is where I know half of you were about to disagree with me, and I want you to disagree in the comments because I want to argue about this one. My honest read is the 85 in Sony Bravia 7, which costs roughly $500 more than the UHQG at equivalent spec, is overpriced for 90% of the buyers walking into the store. The processor advantage Sony has is real. It is genuinely better at upscaling cable, DVD, and 108op streaming. The motion handling on 24 FPS content is a tier above, but that advantage shows up on content that fewer and fewer 85-in buyers actually watch. If you're streaming 4K HDR 90% of the time, you're paying $500 for a tax on watching old material. Drop a comment. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me which legacy content matters enough for you that the Sony processor justifies the spend. I'm genuinely curious. And while we're on Sony, the part nobody talks about with Sony's lineup is what their warranty service costs out of pocket. Repair shop breakdowns on Sony TVs consistently land on the same observation. Parts pricing is among the steepest in the category and labor's no bargain either. Hisense and TCL boards run cheaper on the open market. Samsung sits in the middle. Sony's a problem if it sails after year 3. Just something to factor in. Anyway, back to the U8G. The piece I keep coming back to on this one is the long-term owner thread pattern. 12-month and 18-month follow-ups on the U8 line across the 2024 U8N generation, which is the closest signal we have for how the 2025 UAQG will age, keep flagging two issues. Subtle backlight zone non-uniformity that develops around month 13 on a small percentage of panels, and a minor firmware regression around the 8-month mark that affected Dolby Vision tone mapping until Hisense pushed a patch. Both fixable, both bounded, neither catastrophic, but it's the pattern you want to know going in. Quick gut check on price. The UAQG at $19.90, plus the soundbar you don't actually need, plus a wall mount rated for 150 lb, plus search protection, call it 2250 Allen. The Sony Bravia 7, at the same panel size, same spec class, lands closer to $2,800 all in before you've added any accessory, $550 for a processor advantage on content you mostly don't watch. You decide. Okay, back to the main argument. Now, if you're sitting at home thinking, wait, what about TCL? Yes, we're getting there. The TCL QM7K and QM8K are the third leg of this triangle, and there's a specific reason I'm covering them after the Hisense, not before, because the comparison only makes sense once the U8QG is the reference point. So tell me what you want covered next. The TCL mining LED lineup against the Hisense, that's the obvious comparison. The OLED case against mini LED at this size, that's the harder comparison. The 75 and escape hatch for buyers whose rooms are too small, that's the comparison nobody's making. Drop it in the comments. I'll tilt the next segment towards whatever wins. But for now, the take-home from the first deep dive is this. The 85-in category in 2026 has a clear winner at the value flagship band, and it has a clear loser at the budget band. And the brands have spent significant marketing dollars to make those two facts as hard to see as possible. $89.99 for an 85 is not a deal. It's a strip job. $2,100 for the right mini LED is not extravagance. It's the floor of actually good. That gap, $1,200 between "you'll regret this in 6 months and you'll be fine for 5 years," is the real story of this category right now, right? So the comparison nobody at the store sets up properly is this one. The Hisense U8QG, the TCL QM7K, the TCL QM8K, and the Samsung QN90F at the same panel size. 4 mini LED sets for prices ranging from about $550 to about $2,600. And the spec sheets look almost identical from across the room. The only honest way to compare these is to ignore the spec sheet entirely and ask one question. What does each one give up to hit its price? Because 9 out of 10 times, that's where the buyer's regret actually lives, not in what the TV does and what it had to skip. Listen, the TCL QM7K is the one that gets recommended in roughly half the listicles you'll read this weekend. And the TCL QM7K is my honest read, the most overrated set in the category. Not bad, overrated. There's a difference. The panel is a mini LED. The dimming zone counted 85 and sits in a respectable range. Independent reviewers have flagged it as competent for the price. But when you line up the brightness numbers from Arding's against Tom's Guide against Tecrar, the QM7K sustained full-screen brightness lands meaningfully below the U8QG. We're talking a gap that shows up in a sunlit room within 15 seconds, not in lab measurements in your house on a Saturday with the blinds open. The part nobody talks about. The QM7K's price advantage vanishes when you account for the soundbar tax. TCL's audio at this tier is functional. That's the kindest word. Long-term owner threads keep returning to the same observation. The audio gets fatiguing within an hour, and dialogue clarity drops once you push past 46 or 47% volume. So the real cost of the QM7K isn't $1,650. It's $1,650 plus a $400 soundbar you wouldn't need on the U8G, which makes the U8QG cheaper, not more expensive on a like-for-like delivered experience. Receipts on this one are in the audio measurement charts at independent publications. The U8QG's frequency response curve hits roughly 40 Hz before rolling off. Most 85-in built-ins die north of 80. Now, here's where it gets weird. The QM8K, which is TCL's actual flagship and lands around $2,600 at 85-in, fixes the brightness gap mostly. It also pushes the dimming zone count into territory that genuinely competes with Sony and Samsung's flagships. But the QM8K inherits the same audio criticism the QM7K has for a TV that costs as much as the U8QG plus $300. That's the part that genuinely frustrates me. You'd expect the audio system on a flagship to at least match the mid-tier from the brand right next to it on the shelf. It doesn't. And to be fair, the QM8K's strengths are real. The off-axis viewing is fractionally better than the U8QG. The processing on 24 FPS content is closer to Sony than to Hisense. The remote is one of the best in the category, which sounds like a small thing until you realize you'll touch it 10,000 times over the next 5 years. The Samsung QN90F is the comparison piece that splits the room. Here's my call, and I know half of you will tell me I'm wrong about this one. The QN90F at 85-in, which floats in the $2,300 to $2,600 range right now, is the most showroom impressive home disappointing set in the category in 2026. The picture in vivid mode looks incredible under store fluorescence. Calibrated and brought home, it's solid, just solid. The dimming zone control is good. The off-axis viewing on the Neo QLED panel is better than VA Mini LED rivals. That part is real, but Samsung, at any tier, still refuses to license Dolby Vision, and that means every Apple TV Plus original, every Disney Plus Marvel show, every Netflix Dolby Vision title plays in HDR10 fallback on this set forever, for the entire ownership life of the TV. There is no firmware update coming. This is a corporate decision, not a hardware limit. Tell me in the comments, does Dolby Vision actually matter to you, or are you HDR10 fine? Because the answer to that question alone determines whether the QN90F is on your list at all. This is the tell, by the way. When a brand removes a feature that costs them roughly nothing to license, it's almost always because they're trying to push their own competing standard. Samsung's been pushing HDR10 Plus for years. The streaming services voted with their wallets. They voted Dolby. Samsung's still holding out. The buyer pays the cost of the standoff. Well, remember what I said earlier about the $899 Q6F being a strip job. The Q90F isn't a strip job. It's a positioning decision, different problem. Same family of corporate trade-offs that the buyer absorbs. So if I had to rank these four on actual delivered value at the 85 in size, here's where I'd land. U8QG first by a margin that's bigger than the price gap suggests. QM8K second with the audio caveat. QN90 F3R, and only for buyers who genuinely don't watch Dolby Vision content, which given the Apple TV Plus and Netflix TV catalog is fewer people than Samsung wants to admit. QM7K last of the four, because it's not bad enough to dismiss, but it's not good enough to recommend over the others at the actual delivered cost. Anyway, there's a fifth comparison nobody's making, and it's the one that matters for half the people watching this video, the 75-inch version of any of these. Pulled the QM7K at 75-inch, pull the U8QG at 75-inch, pull the Q90F at 75-in. The 75 in SKUs in the same line cost roughly $400 to $700 less than their 85 in siblings. And the 65 in sibling of the U8 line in independent labs hits brightness numbers that the 85 can't match because thermal headroom doesn't scale. So the smaller panel is on multiple specs, actually brighter, cleaner zone control, better uniformity, less weight to mount, less risk to your wall studs, and for buyers in a room under 10 FT of viewing distance, which is most American living rooms, a more comfortable image. Industry standard SMPTE viewing math puts the comfortable distance for an 85 at around 11 to 12 FT. Thanks puts the immersive distance at 8 and 1/2 FT. Most buyers I see in long-term threads end up sitting at 9 feet or less. Drop your viewing distance in the comments. Florida to TV in feet. I want to see the spread because my honest read is more than half of you are sitting under 10 FT from a screen that's begging for 12. The part nobody talks about on size selection, and this one keeps coming up across the long-term owner threads in a way that's hard to ignore, is what happens at the silent return window. Big box retailers don't publish their return data, but the pattern in forum and Reddit threads is consistent across the 2023, 2024, and 2025 generations of 85 in buyers. A meaningful share quietly swapped down to the 75 in within 30 days. They don't post about it because nobody wants to admit they overbought, but the threads exist if you search for them. The post pattern is always the same. Somebody asks, did anyone return their 85 for a 75? And the replies pile up. The reality anchor on this, the thing that actually matters in your house, not on the spec sheet, is the wall behind your couch. An 85-in TV in a 12-VEC4 FT room dominates the space the way a sectional dominates a studio apartment. It's not bad, it's just present always. Even when it's off, the matte black rectangle sits there. People underestimate how much that matters until month 2. For what it's worth, the buyer who's actually right for the 85 in is the one with at least a 14A8 FT room and at least 11 FT of viewing distance. If your room's smaller than that, the 75 in the same line is the better TV, the better fit, and the better long-term call. Same processor, same OS, same gaming features, same HDR support, smaller panel, cleaner image, less wall dominance, and $300 to $700 back in your pocket. Now, I want to talk about the OLED question because every comparison piece in this category dodges it by pretending the LG C5 at 83 in is in a different price tier. It's not. It's in your tier if your top end is $3,500. And the question of do I stretch for OLED at this size is the cleanest, most binary decision in the entire category. There's a single variable that determines the answer, and it has nothing to do with brand, price, or specs. So here's the OLED answer I owed you. The single variable is the window. If your viewing room has uncontrolled daytime light, west-facing windows, skylights, glass doors, a wall of bright walls bouncing afternoon sun around, OLED at 83 in is the wrong call. Full stop. Doesn't matter that the C5 is the most reviewed, loved set in the category. Doesn't matter that the blacks are referenced. Sustained full-screen brightness on the C5 lands meaningfully under what many LED rivals push. And in a sun-flooded room, you'll fill that gap every afternoon for the next 7 years. But if your room has controllable light, curtains that close, a basement, a dedicated theater corner, a north-facing apartment, the LG C5 at 83 and in the 3500 to 3900 range is the most cinematically correct image you can put in your house at that size. The decision is the room, not the brand, not the price, the room. Okay? So let's group these by who you actually are. Because the question isn't, what's the best 85 in TV? The question is, what's the best 85 in TV for the specific person watching this video right now, the Bright Room family, you watch with the curtains open. You've got kids running through, the TV is on at noon, at 400 p.m., at 9:12 p.m. Your room is loud, lit, and lived in. Your TV is the Hisense U8QG at 85 in around 1990 on sale. Sustained brightness handles your worst-case afternoon. Audio is loud enough to cut through the chaos without a soundbar in year 1. Dolby Vision works on every streamer. Google TV is fast enough. Off-axis is mediocre, but at this price it's the smallest compromise on the table. The console gamer, PS5 Pro Series 10, eventually a Switch 2 docked. You care about input lag. You care about VRR. You care about HDMI 2.1 bandwidth on at least 2 ports because a soundbar is about to eat one. Your TV is the TCL QM8K at 85 and around 2300 when it dips. Native 144 Hz, full 48 Gbit on the relevant ports, single-digit millisecond game move latency, and the dimming zone control is genuinely flagship grade. Pair it with a separate sound system you were going to anyway. Gamers always do, and the audio criticism becomes irrelevant. The cinema room owner controlled light, maybe a basement, blackout curtains. You watch movies, not cable. Your TV is the LG C5 at 83 in somewhere in the 3500 to 3900 zone right now. Burn-in risk on the 2025 OLED generation is bounded, not zero, but bounded. And if your viewing pattern is mostly varied film and streaming with occasional gaming, you'll likely never see retention. If you're a cable news on all-day household, skip OLED entirely and go QM8K. The value maximizer. You walked in thinking $899. My honest read on this one, you should not buy an 85 at all. A 75 in U7QG at around $1250 does more for you than the 85 in Q6F at $899 ever will. Better panel tech, better backlight, better processing, better long-term experience. The 89985 in is a trap built specifically for this buyer, and the receipts are in the long-term owner threads. 12 months in, the buyer who stretched for the smaller but better panel is still happy. The buyer who anchored on diagonal inches is replacing the soundbar, regretting the purchase, or already shopping for the next TV. The sports host, game day, living room, 8 people on the sectional. Your TV is also the U8QG, but for a different reason than the Bright Room family. The audio system actually works for a crowd. The brightness wins against beer and pretzels lighting, and the HDMI count handles the cable box, the Roku, and the Apple TV without juggling. Best overall, and this is the one I keep coming back to, is the Hisense 85 U8QG. Not because it's flawless, it isn't. The anti-glare coating is mediocre. The off-axis is typical VA. There's a faint backlight uniformity drift that shows up in roughly month 13 on a small percentage of panels in the long-term owner reports. But for the buyer in this video, the one with 2500 and a bright American living room, the UAQG delivers more of what actually matters than anything else in the category, and it does it for hundreds less than Sony or Samsung. Best value, and this is going to surprise some of you, is the TCL 85 Q6K around $2,100 when it's on sale, not the Q7K, the Q6K. because the Q7K is in the awkward middle where you should either go cheaper and honest or go U8, QG, and flagship. And the Q6K honestly admits what it is. An entry mini LED with 144 Hz capability and decent zone control at a price the budget tier 60 Hz strip jobs can't touch on actual delivered experience. To be fair, the Q6K is not in the same league as the U8G. It's not trying to be. It's the right TV for the buyer who genuinely cannot stretch past 1/200. Now, here's the late debate, the value question that splits a room. Is it actually worth the $900 gap from the QM6K to the U8QG? Because at $100, you got the entry mini LED with a credible image. At $190, you've got the flagship class mini LED with the audio system, the brightness, and the dimming zones. Reasonable people land different ways on this. If you watch 4 hours a day for the next 5 years, the U8QG delivers roughly 40 cents a day in extra delivered experience. If you watch 2 hours a week, the QM6K is the right call by a landslide. Drop a vote in the comments, QM6K or U8QG, and tell me your daily viewing hours. I'm going to read these. I want to see the spread. Listen, I want to land this video on something honest. The 85 in category in 2026 is not the deal it pretends to be. The price floor has dropped. The diagonal inches have grown. The marketing has gotten louder. But the gap between competent 85 in and regret purchased 85 in has gotten wider, not narrower. And the brands have specifically chosen to make that gap hard to see. $890 for an 85 in 2026 is not a discount. It is a panel that the manufacturer engineered down to a price point. And what got engineered out? The dimming zones, the native refresh rate, the processor, the HDR support is exactly the stuff that determines whether the TV looks like a TV or looks like a billboard with a remote. The truth bomb is this. The biggest mistake the buyer of this video is about to make isn't picking the wrong brand. It's picking the wrong size. Half the people watching are going to buy an 85 because the price tag finally said yes, and they're going to walk it up to a wall in a room that's too small for it. And within 60 days, the wrong tool for job feeling is going to settle in, and they're going to live with that feeling for the next 5 years. Money you can't get back, wall mount holes you can't unmake, a box too big to easily return. So before you click buy, measure the wall, measure the viewing distance, measure the doorway the box has to come through. The standard 32 in interior door usually clears an 85 inch in its box. Standard stairwell turns usually don't. Lay the tape on the floor at 8 and 1/2 FT and 11 FT and decide which mark your couch is closer to. If it's the 11 FT mark, get the 85. If it's the 812 mark or closer, the 75 in the same line is genuinely the better TV for your specific room. That's not a downgrade. That's a right fit decision. Quick housekeeping. Links to vetted U8QG and QM8K sources are pinned in the description focused on the US retailer SKUs that match the model numbers reviewed by the major independent labs. There are off-brand and gray market 85 in sets floating around on Amazon and aren't. The pinned links avoid the revision traps. If you want the U8QG specifically, the model code matters. Hisense quietly runs panel revisions across the same SKU, and the labs measure the early production run. The pinned source filters for that. Drop your 3 answers in the comments. Room size, viewing distance, daily hours of use. I'll read them. The next video in this series, assuming you tell me you want it, is the 75 in comparison nobody's making. And it's honestly the more interesting category right now because that's where the actual value lives in 2026. Hi, this is NextGen Picks. One last thing, the comments on this video are going to split. Half of you are going to defend the QN90F. Half are going to push back on the 85 versus 75 call. Some of you are going to tell me the Sony Bravia 7 was worth the $500 premium and you'd buy it again. Good. That's the conversation I want. Drop your setup. Tell me what's running in your living room right now, what you'd change, what you wouldn't. The receipts are there if you look, and the comment section is where the receipts get compared. If this video saved you from a wrong size purchase, hit the like button. If it cost you a Sunday because now you have to measure your living room, that one's on me. I'll see you in the next